Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Here's the thing about diplomacy. It was never supposed to be easy. But when you're dealing with species that have about as much sense of humor as a tax audit and bodily functions that might as well be classified state secrets, well, things get interesting fast. The Frontier Exchange Station hung in orbit like a metal soap bubble around a moon that nobody really cared about, which made it perfect neutral ground. Perfect, that is, if you ignored the fact that the life support systems wheezed like an asthmatic accordion, the artificial gravity fluctuated just enough to make your coffee float away mid-sip, and the whole place smelled faintly of burnt wiring and recycled everything. But hey, it kept the peace. Mostly. Lieutenant Jessica stood in the observation deck, hands clasped behind her back, in what she hoped looked like professional composure, watching the Quemati delegation ship glide into docking position. The ship was gorgeous, she'd give them that, all flowing curves and bioluminescent panels that pulsed in patterns she suspected meant something incredibly important to someone who wasn't her. She'd been briefed, of course, extensively. The Quemati were feline adjacent. If cats had evolved into a spacefaring civilization and developed an obsession with protocol that would make a Victorian etiquette instructor weep with joy. They stood upright, possessed fur in shades ranging from silver to deep amber, and had eyes that could probably see your soul if you weren't careful. More importantly, they controlled access to 3 major jump gate corridors, which meant humanity needed them to like us, or at least tolerate us, or, at minimum, not actively block our shipping lanes. No pressure. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thunk that reverberated through the deck plating. Jessica rolled her shoulders once, twice, trying to shake off the tension that had taken up permanent residence between her shoulder blades. Behind her, the reception committee stood at attention, a mix of station personnel and diplomatic aides, all wearing expressions of determined pleasantness. Commander Thane had been very clear in his final instructions. Jessica, I'm putting you in charge because you're good with people, all kinds of people. Even the furry ones who think showing emotion is equivalent to public indecency. Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not screw this up. She'd nodded seriously, promised to be the very picture of diplomatic excellence, and absolutely meant it. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Ambassador Felinara emerged first, as protocol demanded. She was tall, taller than Jessica by a good half-meter, with fur the color of brushed platinum and eyes like chips of amber ice. Her robes were elaborate, layered things that probably cost more than Jessica's annual salary, and whispered with each movement. Everything about her screamed dignity, authority, and a complete lack of tolerance for nonsense. Behind her came Consort Bryn Nathor, slightly shorter, with darker fur striped in patterns that reminded Jessica of earth tigers. He held himself with equal formality, but there was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe, or at least less rigid disapproval of the universe in general. And then, peeking around Bryn Nathor's robes, came little Wisp. Oh no! Jessica felt her professional composure wobble. The cub was tiny, maybe waist-high on his father, with oversized ears that swiveled independently and enormous eyes that took in the observation deck with unconcealed wonder. His fur was still fluffy with youth, a soft gray-blue that hadn't yet settled into adult coloring. He was, and there was no other word for it, absolutely adorable. Jessica mentally repeated her diplomatic training like a mantra. Stay professional. Cultural sensitivity. No unexpected reactions. Smile politely. Do not, under any circumstances, make squealing noises at the alien dignitaries. The formal greetings began. Ambassador Felinara inclined her head exactly the prescribed amount. Jessica had studied the recordings, knew it was precisely 32 degrees, held for exactly 3 heartbeats. Jessica returned the gesture, matching it as closely as human anatomy allowed. "Ambassador," Jessica said, keeping her voice level and warm. "On behalf of humanity and the Frontier Exchange Station, we welcome you and your delegation. We are honored by your presence and hopeful for productive discussions between our peoples." Felinara's ears flicked once, which the briefing materials had indicated was acknowledgement. "Lieutenant Jessica, we accept your welcome and extend our own hopes for mutual understanding." Her voice had a purring quality to it, but cold, like a glacier that happened to vibrate at pleasant frequencies. The formal exchange continued. Titles were recited, credentials were established. The carefully choreographed dance of first contact protocols played out exactly as planned. And then, little Wisp, overwhelmed by the new environment, the recycled station air, and possibly the stress of keeping perfectly still during boring adult conversations, did what any small creature might do when their nose itched and their sinuses objected to their current atmosphere. He sneezed. It wasn't a big sneeze. It wasn't even a particularly loud sneeze. It was, in fact, possibly the tiniest, most delicate sneeze Jessica had ever heard. A small chiff of sound, accompanied by Wisp's whole small body doing a tiny, involuntary bounce. What happened next, Jessica would later reflect, was entirely beyond her control. She laughed. Not a small, polite chuckle that could be diplomatically ignored. Not a brief exhalation that might be mistaken for clearing her throat. No, Jessica laughed. A full, genuine burst of delighted amusement that echoed through the observation deck like a bell nobody had asked to ring. The sound died as quickly as it came. Jessica slapped her hand over her mouth, eyes widening as she processed what she'd just done. Around her, the rest of the reception committee froze, their expressions shifting from diplomatic neutrality to barely concealed horror. Ambassador Felinara's fur bristled, each hair standing on end in a wave of visible offense that traveled from her ears to the tip of her tail. Bryn Nathor's eyes widened, his own tail lashing once, sharply. Behind them, the other members of the Kumathi delegation stiffened as though they'd been collectively electrocuted. Little Wisp pressed himself against his father's leg, ears flattened, looking utterly mortified. Oh, stars and void! What had she done? "Ambassador, Jessica started, then stopped. Because what exactly did one say? "Sorry I laughed at your child's involuntary bodily function"? My bad. Didn't mean to find your offspring sneeze the cutest thing I've witnessed in 3 months? Felinara drew herself up to her full height, which suddenly seemed much more imposing than it had moments before. "Lieutenant," she said, and her voice could have flash-frozen plasma. "Among my people, the loss of physical control is not a matter for amusement." "Of course not, Ambassador. I sincerely apologize." Jessica scrambled for words, her brain frantically flipping through her cultural sensitivity training. Had there been something about sneezing? There must have been. Why couldn't she remember? "It is considered a profound embarrassment," Felinara continued, each word precisely enunciated, "to display such vulnerability in public, and to respond to it with mockery." "It wasn't mockery," Jessica blurted, then immediately wished she hadn't because interrupting was definitely not on the list of diplomatic best practices. "I mean, Ambassador, with respect, in human culture, when something small and young does something unexpected, we find it endearing, charming. It's an instinctive response, particularly to children. I wasn't mocking Wisp at all, I was—" She fumbled for the word, knowing, even as she searched, that there probably wasn't a good translation for the concept of cute aggression or the overwhelming human need to protect and coddle things that were small and helpless. "Delighted?" she finished weakly. Felinara's ears flattened against her skull. Behind her, Bryn Nathor placed a gentle hand on Wisp's shoulder, murmuring something too quiet for the translators to catch. The little cub looked like he wanted the deck plating to open up and swallow him whole. "I believe," Felinara said, her tone suggesting that she believed no such thing, "that we require time to settle into our quarters and reflect on appropriate protocols for future interactions," which was diplomatic speak for "we're leaving before this gets worse." Jessica nodded, maintaining what she hoped was appropriate contrition, while internally screaming, "Of course, Ambassador. Please allow our staff to escort you. Again, my sincerest apologies for any offense." The Kumati delegation filed out in perfect formation, dignity intact despite the circumstances. Little Wisp glanced back once as they passed through the doorway, his large eyes meeting Jessica's for just a moment before his father guided him forward. The doors slid shut. Silence descended on the observation deck like a suffocating blanket. One of the diplomatic aides, Jessica thought his name was perhaps Thomas, or maybe Trevor, cleared his throat. "Well," he said, with the careful tone of someone trying very hard not to make things worse, "that could have gone better." Jessica closed her eyes and took a long, slow breath. "I need to go call Commander Thane and explain why I just potentially destroyed interstellar relations because a kitten, because an alien child sneezed, and I have the emotional control of an overstimulated puppy." "In your defense," another aide offered helpfully, "it was a very cute sneeze." Jessica shot her a look that could have melted hull plating. Not helping. She turned and strode toward the exit, already mentally composing her report. How did one explain that millions of years of human evolution, which had fine-tuned the species to find anything small and vulnerable automatically adorable as a survival mechanism, had just collided face-first with a culture that viewed bodily functions as shameful? Behind her, she heard someone mutter, "Commander Thane is going to lose his mind." Yeah, Jessica thought grimly, as she headed for her quarters and the inevitable uncomfortable conversation with her commanding officer. Yeah, he probably is. Jessica's quarters were small, functional, and decorated with exactly 3 personal items: a photo of her family back on Earth, a potted succulent that was somehow still alive despite her best efforts to forget it existed, and a collection of data chips containing every terrible comedy show humanity had ever produced. She collapsed into her desk chair and activated the holocom with the enthusiasm of someone scheduling their own execution. Commander Thane's face materialized above her desk, and his expression told her everything she needed to know. He'd already heard. "Let me guess," he said, rubbing his temples in slow, deliberate circles. "You laughed." "I laughed," Jessica confirmed miserably, "at the ambassador's child. At the ambassador's child's sneeze, specifically." Thane let out a long breath that seemed to deflate him slightly. "Jessica, we talked about this. We specifically talked about maintaining composure during formal greetings." "I know, Commander. I just—" Jessica gestured helplessly. "Have you seen the briefing images of Kwamati cubs? They have these enormous ears, and when Wisp sneezed, his whole tiny body just bounced, and I couldn't—" "You couldn't control your instinctive human response to finding small things adorable," Thane finished, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was fighting his own battle with the mental image. "I understand. Evolution is a cruel mistress. But the Quimathi don't see it that way. To them, you just publicly humiliated a child for experiencing a bodily function. Jessica winced. Ambassador Felinara looked ready to declare war. She's considering cutting the talks short and leaving within the next 26 hours, Thane said bluntly. Her official statement cited fundamental cultural incompatibilities and inappropriate conduct unbecoming of diplomatic proceedings. 26 hours. Jessica's stomach dropped. The Quimathi controlled access to jump gate corridors that humanity desperately needed for expansion and trade. Losing their cooperation would set human exploration back by decades, force massive rerouting of shipping lanes, and potentially cost billions in lost commerce. All because she'd laughed at a sneeze. "Commander, let me fix this," Jessica said, leaning forward. "I'll send a formal apology, explain the cultural context, do whatever damage control." "Already done," Thane interrupted. "I sent the official apology an hour ago. Very formal, very contrite. Blamed the incident on insufficient cultural preparation and your personal failing, not on humanity as a whole." "Thanks for throwing me under the transport," Jessica muttered. "You threw yourself, Lieutenant. I'm just making sure the transport doesn't run over the rest of us." But his expression softened slightly. "However, you're right that you should try to fix this. The formal apology addresses the diplomatic requirements. But if you can somehow make them understand the actual context, well, it couldn't hurt. Just don't make it worse." Jessica nodded slowly, an idea forming. "What if I sent a personal note, not official, just human to Kwamathi, explaining why we react the way we do to small, vulnerable things, the evolution, the survival instincts, the whole biological programming that makes us go slightly stupid when we see anything small and helpless?" Thane considered this, tilting his head. "It's unorthodox. The Quimathi aren't known for appreciating personal appeals. They prefer rigid formality." "Which is exactly why they don't understand what happened," Jessica argued. "They think I was being cruel. If I can explain that it's literally hardwired into human biology, that we can't help but feel protective and affectionate toward young creatures, maybe they'll at least understand it wasn't malicious." "Fine," Thane said after a moment. "Send your note. But Jessica, if this backfires and somehow makes things worse, I'm reassigning you to inventory management in Cargo Bay 12 for the next 6 months." Jessica grimaced. Cargo Bay 12 was where they stored the protein paste shipments. The smell never left. "Understood, Commander." The holocom flickered off, leaving Jessica alone with her thoughts and her terrible decisions. She pulled up a blank document and stared at it, fingers hovering over the input pad. How did one explain cute aggression to a species that viewed loss of control as shameful? She started typing, deleted everything, started again. By the 5th attempt, she had something that didn't sound completely ridiculous. "Ambassador Felinara and honored delegation, I write this not as official correspondence, but as a personal attempt to bridge the misunderstanding that occurred during our initial meeting. I understand that my reaction to Wisp's sneeze was deeply offensive within Quimathi culture, and I want to explain the human perspective, not as excuse, but as context. Humans evolved as social primates on a world with numerous predators and environmental challenges. Our survival depended on protecting our young, who are born incredibly helpless and remain dependent for years. Over millions of years, we developed what scientists call baby schema, an automatic, involuntary response to certain physical traits. Large eyes, small body size, rounded features, and clumsy movements. When we encounter these traits, our brains release chemicals that create feelings of affection, protectiveness, and yes, delight. It's not a choice. It's not mockery. It's an ancient survival mechanism that ensured we cared for our vulnerable offspring even when they were loud, messy, and demanding. When Wisp sneezed, my response wasn't to his embarrassment. It was to the combination of his small size, his unexpected movement, and the tiny sound. To human perception, these things trigger what we call endearment. We find vulnerability charming because we're programmed to want to protect it. I understand this may not translate well to committee experience, but I hope it clarifies that no disrespect was intended. Quite the opposite. My reaction was one of instinctive positive regard. With sincere apologies and respect, Lieutenant Jessica. She read it over 3 times, adjusted the phrasing, then sent it before she could second-guess herself further. The message disappeared into the station's communication network, bound for the Kumathi delegation quarters. Now she just had to wait and hope she hadn't made everything catastrophically worse. Jessica tried to distract herself with reports and station maintenance schedules, but concentration proved impossible. She gave up after reading the same paragraph about coolant system efficiency 6 times without processing a single word. Instead, she grabbed a watering bulb and headed to the one place on the station where she could think clearly: the Arboretum. The Arboretum was technically a research facility for studying plant growth in artificial environments, but practically it was Jessica's sanctuary. She'd volunteered to maintain the earth plant section, which meant she had legitimate access and a reason to spend hours surrounded by growing things that didn't care about diplomatic incidents or interstellar relations. The air here felt different, more humid, more alive. The lighting panels above mimicked natural sunlight in cycles that kept the plants healthy and gave the space an almost outdoor quality. Jessica made her rounds, checking soil moisture, trimming dead leaves, murmuring encouragement to a tomato plant that refused to fruit. She was elbow-deep in repotting a fern when she heard the soft hiss of the Arboretum door opening. Jessica looked up, expecting to see one of the botany technicians. Instead, she found herself staring at little Wisp, who stood in the doorway with his ears swiveling uncertainly and a translation device hanging around his neck on a lanyard that was comically too large for him. They both froze. Wisp's ears flattened slightly, and for a moment Jessica thought he might bolt. But then curiosity seemed to win over apprehension, and the small cub took a tentative step forward, his large eyes taking in the green chaos around him. "Hello," Jessica said softly, keeping her voice gentle and trying very hard not to smile too widely, because apparently her smiling was problematic. "Does your family know you're here?" Wisp's translator device crackled to life with his response, rendering his lilting native language into flat digital words. "I wanted to ask you something. I was careful. Nobody saw me leave." Which was probably not great from a responsible adult perspective, but Jessica decided that was a problem for future Jessica. Present Jessica was more concerned with not causing an interstellar incident. Part 2. "You can ask me anything," Jessica said, setting down her trowel and brushing soil from her hands. "Though you should probably tell your parents where you are soon, or they'll worry." Wisp took another step forward, his small clawed feet silent on the metal decking. "Why did you laugh at me?" The question was direct, innocent, and hit Jessica right in the chest. She sank down to sit cross-legged on the floor, making herself smaller, less imposing. Wisp approached cautiously until he was within arm's reach, close enough that Jessica could see the individual hairs of his fluffy gray-blue fur. "I wasn't laughing at you," Jessica said carefully. "I was laughing because, okay, this is going to sound strange, but humans have this thing where When we see something small and unexpected, especially with young ones, we can't help but feel happy. Your sneeze was tiny, and you were trying so hard to be dignified, and then your whole body bounced, and my brain just went, "Oh, that's the most endearing thing I've witnessed in months?" Wisp's head tilted, one ear swiveling forward. Endearing? Charming. Appealing. It made me want to— Jessica paused, trying to find words that would translate properly. Humans have a strong instinct to protect and care for small things. When we see vulnerability in something young, we don't see shame. We see something precious that needs to be kept safe. The translator struggled with some of the nuances, but Wisp seemed to be following. His tail, which had been tucked tight against his legs, relaxed slightly. "Among my people," Wisp said quietly, "losing control is shameful. Father says I must learn to master my body's responses, to present myself with dignity at all times. When I sneezed, I failed. And when you laughed, I thought—" He paused, searching for words. "I thought you were showing me that I was right to feel ashamed." Jessica's heart twisted. "Oh, Wisp, no. That's not— Humans don't see it that way at all. Can I show you something?" At his curious ear flick, Jessica pulled out her datapad and scrolled through her files. She found what she was looking for and turned the screen toward him. The video showed a human baby, maybe 8 months old, sitting in a high chair. The baby sneezed, then looked startled by its own sneeze, then sneezed again. The infant's face scrunched up in confusion before breaking into delighted giggles, apparently amused by its own bodily functions. In the background, adult voices laughed with clear affection. Wisp watched, transfixed. The adults are laughing. "Because the baby is funny and sweet," Jessica explained. "Not because we're mocking. Because we love that little human and find everything it does wonderful, even the awkward or unexpected things." She scrolled to another video, a puppy sneezing and falling backward in surprise, then a kitten tumbling off a couch, then a compilation of human children doing clumsy, silly things while adults watched with obvious adoration. "You're showing me failures," Wisp said slowly, but his tone was confused rather than offended. "Creatures losing control, being undignified, but the observers seem pleased?" "We're charmed," Jessica corrected gently. "Humans find vulnerability endearing, especially in the young. We evolved to feel protective and affectionate toward things that need care. If I saw you struggling with something, my first instinct wouldn't be judgment. It would be to want to help you, to keep you safe, to make sure you're okay." Wisp was silent for a long moment, processing. His tail swished once, twice, in what Jessica's admittedly limited knowledge suggested was contemplation rather than agitation. "This is very strange," he finally announced. Jessica laughed, gently this time, carefully. "I imagine it is. Your culture and mine probably evolved very differently. But I promise, Wisp, when I laughed at your sneeze, it wasn't mockery. It was because I thought you were absolutely adorable, and my brain short-circuited with happiness." "Adorable," Wisp repeated, testing the word. "This means small and pleasing?" "More or less, yeah." The cub sat back on his haunches, clearly turning this over in his mind. "My parents would not understand this." "Probably not," Jessica admitted. "But maybe—" The arboretum door hissed open again, and this time Bryn Nathor stood in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his ears were forward, alert, and his tail was still rather than lashing. Wisp's own ears flattened in clear, "Oh no, I'm in trouble" fashion. But Bryn Nathor didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful. He approached slowly. his gaze moving between Jessica and his son. "Wisp," he said in his own language, and the translator rendered it a moment later. "Your mother is worried." "I'm sorry, Father," Wisp said, his small voice contrite. "I needed to understand." Brenda Nathor's attention shifted to Jessica, and she straightened slightly under his scrutiny. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Brenda Nathor said, "What did you tell him?" Jessica took a breath. "The truth, that humans react positively to vulnerability in the young because we're evolutionarily programmed to protect and care for small things. That when I laughed at his sneeze, it was an involuntary response of affection, not mockery." Bryn Nathor's tail swished once. "You speak of evolution and instinct as though they override choice." "Sometimes they do," Jessica said honestly. "We can control our actions, usually, but not always our immediate reactions." My laughter was automatic. It happened before my conscious mind could stop it. But the emotion behind it was genuine affection, not cruelty. The consort was quiet, his gaze moving to the data pad that still displayed the video of the sneezing baby. "May I see this?" Jessica handed it over. Bryn Nathor watched the video, his expression inscrutable, then scrolled through the others she'd shown Wisp. The puppy. The kitten. The compilation of children being clumsy and adults responding with clear love. "Your species finds imperfection appealing," he said slowly. "In the young, especially," Jessica confirmed, "but honestly, in each other too. We're not a species that values perfection the way yours does. We find the flaws endearing. They make us relatable to each other." Bryn Nathor handed back the datapad. "This is a very different way of seeing the world." "I imagine it is." He looked down at Wisp, who was watching his father with anxious hope. Then Bryn Nathor did something unexpected. He reached down and gently ruffled the fur on top of his son's head, an affectionate gesture that made Wisp's ears perk up in surprise. "Perhaps," Bryn Nathor said quietly, "there is value in understanding how others perceive such things." He met Jessica's gaze. "I will speak with Ambassador Felinara. I cannot promise she will understand, but I will try to explain what you have shown us." Jessica felt hope flutter cautiously in her chest. "Thank you, Consort Bryn Nathor. That's all I can ask." He inclined his head, then guided Wisp toward the door with a gentle hand on the cub's shoulder. At the threshold, Wisp looked back and, very deliberately, made a small sneezing sound. Clearly fake, clearly on purpose. Then he ducked out of sight, leaving Jessica staring after him in surprise. Had the little cub just played with the concept? Tested it out as something fun rather than shameful? Jessica found herself grinning despite everything. Maybe, just maybe, this disaster wasn't completely unsalvageable after all. Bryn Nathor proved to be more persuasive than Jessica had dared hope. By the following morning, she received a terse message through official channels. Ambassador Felinara had agreed to attend an informal cultural exchange demonstration in Recreation Lounge 5. The message made it abundantly clear this was a courtesy, not a concession, and that the Quimati delegation remained skeptical of any meaningful reconciliation. Jessica would take what she could get. She spent the next 6 hours preparing, which mostly involved bribing 3 other humans to attend and promising them she'd cover their less desirable duty shifts for the next month. Technician Val agreed immediately. The man would show up to the opening of an airlock if there was free food involved, and his naturally jovial personality made him perfect for what Jessica had planned. Ensign Dante took more convincing but eventually agreed with his characteristic quiet resignation. Lieutenant Fiona initially refused on the grounds that this sounded like a terrible idea that will end with all of us scrubbing plasma conduits, but loyalty won out over self-preservation. Recreation Lounge 5 was typically used for off-duty personnel to decompress. It had comfortable seating, decent lighting, and entertainment systems that mostly worked. Jessica rearranged the furniture into a casual circle, set out refreshments that accommodated both human and Kumati dietary requirements, and tried to project confidence she absolutely didn't feel. The Kumati arrived precisely on time, because, of course, they did. Felinara entered first, her posture radiating skepticism from every angle. Bryn Nathor followed with Wisp, who perked up slightly when he saw Jessica. 3 other adult Kumati, whose names Jessica had memorized but whose roles remained somewhat mysterious, completed their group. The humans stood as the delegation entered, and Jessica gestured to the arranged seating. "Ambassador, consort, honored guests, thank you for agreeing to meet. Please, make yourselves comfortable. This is entirely informal, just conversation and, hopefully, understanding." Felinara settled into a seat with elaborate grace, her tail arranging itself in precise curves. "Lieutenant Jessica, Consort Bryn Nathor has advocated for this meeting. I remain unconvinced of its value, but I am willing to observe your demonstration." The words, "I am willing to observe," carried roughly the same energy as, "I am willing to watch you fail spectacularly." But Jessica pressed on. "I appreciate your time, Ambassador. What I'd like to share today is how humans use humor, play, and shared vulnerability to build social bonds. These aren't signs of weakness in our culture. They're actually how we create trust and connection." Jessica gestured to her companions. "This is Technician Val, Ensign Dante, and Lieutenant Fiona. They've agreed to help me demonstrate some human behaviors that might seem strange from a Kumati perspective." Val waved cheerfully. Dante nodded with quiet dignity. Fiona looked like she was already regretting every life choice that had led to this moment. Jessica started with the basics: human jokes, puns, physical comedy videos from Earth. She'd carefully curated content that didn't rely too heavily on cultural context. Slapstick, mostly. Pratfalls. The universal humor of someone walking into a glass door. The Kumati watched with polite incomprehension. "You find injury amusing?" one of the unnamed delegates asked, their tone genuinely puzzled. "When we know the person isn't actually hurt, yes," Jessica explained. "The surprise, the dignity lost and regained. It's funny because we've all experienced similar moments. It's shared imperfection." Felinara's tail flicked in what Jessica was beginning to recognize as thoughtful disagreement. "Our humor is more complex, based on linguistic patterns, contextual layers, temporal positioning of concepts," which explained why the Kwemathi weren't laughing at videos of humans slipping on banana peels. Different evolutionary pressures, different social structures, different everything. Time to switch tactics. "Let me show you something else," Jessica said. "Humans have these behaviors that spread between us automatically. We don't even think about it. Val, help me demonstrate?" Val grinned, always ready for anything that involved attention. Jessica made a show of yawning, big, exaggerated, with the full stretch and jaw crack. Within seconds, Val yawned too. Then Dante. Then, amazingly, Fiona. Wisp's ears perked up with interest. Even Bryn Nathor tilted his head, clearly noticing the pattern. "Contagious behaviors," Jessica explained. "Yawning, laughing, even emotions. They spread between humans without conscious choice. It's how we synchronize with each other, build group cohesion." "Fascinating," Bryn Nathor murmured. "A biological mechanism for social bonding." "Exactly. And one of those contagious behaviors. Jessica paused for effect, then fake sneezed dramatically, complete with full body involvement and exaggerated sound. Val immediately responded with an equally theatrical, "Bless you," and then produced his own ridiculous fake sneeze, somehow involving his arms flailing. Dante, despite his usual reserve, offered a dignified fake sneeze that still managed to be obviously deliberate. Fiona rolled her eyes but participated with a small achoo that was more sound effect than actual sneeze. Jessica watched the Kumati carefully. Wisp's eyes had gone enormous, his small body practically vibrating with the desire to participate. The other delegates looked confused. Bryn Nathor appeared thoughtful, and Felinara's ears had rotated forward with what might have been the beginning of curiosity. "You're deliberately performing the action you find shameful," one of the delegates said slowly. "As entertainment?" "We're playing with vulnerability," Jessica corrected gently. "Taking something that just happens to bodies, something nobody can control, and making it fun. Making it connect us instead of embarrassing us." Wisp made a tiny sound, almost a question. His father glanced down at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Then, with visible deliberation and no small amount of courage, little Wisp produced a small, obviously fake sneeze. The room went silent. Jessica felt her heart hammering. This was the moment. Either the Kumathi would see this as their cub desecrating their cultural values, or they'd see it as something else entirely. Bryn Nathor looked at his son for a long moment. Then, incredibly, the consort fake sneezed too. A larger, more resonant sound that was clearly intentional. Wisp's ears shot straight up in delighted shock. Felinara's fur rippled in what Jessica really hoped was surprise rather than fury. The ambassador stared at her mate, then at her son, then at the circle of humans who were very carefully not reacting too strongly, waiting to see how this played out. "You're suggesting," Felinara said slowly, each word measured, "that we should find amusement in our physical vulnerabilities, that we should play with them." "I'm suggesting," Jessica said carefully, "that there's strength in acknowledging imperfection. That vulnerability, when shared willingly, creates bonds instead of shame. We're not asking you to abandon your values, Ambassador. Just, maybe, see them from a different angle." The silence stretched. Dante shifted slightly. Val maintained his cheerful expression through sheer force of personality. Fiona looked ready to bolt. Then Felinara did something none of them expected. She fake sneezed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't particularly dramatic, but it was deliberately, consciously done, and the ambassador's eyes remained locked on Jessica's the entire time, as if daring her to laugh. Jessica didn't laugh. She smiled. Warm, approving, genuine, and then she fake sneezed right back. Wisp made a sound that the translator struggled to render, but that was clearly pure joy. And then the little cub sneezed again, this time with more confidence, more playfulness. Bryn Nathor joined in. Then Val, because Val had never met a party he wouldn't enthusiastically crash. Then the other Kumati delegates, tentatively, testing this bizarre new concept of deliberate vulnerability as play. Within minutes, Recreation Lounge 5 had devolved into the strangest symphony of fake sneezes ever witnessed in the history of interstellar diplomacy. Some were small, some were elaborate, some were clearly just making noise, but all of them were intentional. All of them were shared. And when Jessica caught Felinara's eye again, the ambassador's expression had shifted into something that might, possibly, with generous interpretation, be called the beginning of amusement. "This is absurd," Felinara said. "Completely," Jessica agreed. "We are dignified beings having a conversation about deliberate bodily functions as entertainment." "Yep." Felinara's tail swished once, then twice. "I do not understand your species, Lieutenant Jessica." "That's okay, Ambassador," Jessica said with a grin. "We barely understand ourselves most of the time." And then, because the universe apparently had a sense of humor after all, Wisp sneezed for real. A genuine, tiny, involuntary sneeze that made his whole body bounce. Everyone paused. Jessica laughed, gently, warmly, the same way she had before. And this time, Felinara's whiskers twitched in what might have been the Kumathi equivalent of a smile. By evening, the entire station knew something had shifted. Word spread through the crew quarters, the mess halls, the maintenance corridors. The Kumathi delegation, those paragons of dignity and control, had spent the afternoon deliberately sneezing with humans in Recreation Lounge 5. Jessica found herself in the station's central plaza, watching something she never could have predicted. Kumathi, of all ages, from the dignified elders to cubs barely old enough to walk, were experimenting with deliberate sneezes, punctuating conversations with playful little sounds, testing this radical concept of voluntary vulnerability as entertainment. Wisp was in the center of a small group of younglings, demonstrating his technique with the pride of someone who'd discovered fire. His exaggerated sneezes sent the other cubs into chittering sounds that the translators struggled to interpret, but that were clearly laughter-adjacent. Bryn Nathor approached Jessica, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. "Lieutenant, my mate wishes to speak with you." Jessica followed him to where Felinara stood, observing the plaza, her tail swishing in contemplative patterns. The ambassador's gaze tracked the playing cubs, the adults tentatively joining in, the slow dissolution of rigid control in favor of something messier and more honest. "Lieutenant Jessica," Felinara said without preamble, "I have been thinking about what you demonstrated today, about vulnerability as strength rather than weakness." "Ambassador, let me finish." Felinara's ears rotated toward her, full attention locked on Jessica. "The Kumathi have prided ourselves on perfect control for countless generations. We believed that mastery of self was the highest achievement. But watching my son today, seeing his joy in being deliberately imperfect." She paused, searching for words. "Perhaps we have been too rigid. Perhaps there is wisdom in your human approach, acknowledging that we are fallible beings and finding connection in that shared fallibility rather than shame." Jessica felt something tight in her chest loosen. "I think every species has things to learn from each other, Ambassador. We're all just trying to survive and find meaning in this ridiculous universe." Felinara's whiskers twitched. Definitely amusement this time. "Ridiculous. Yes, I am beginning to see the universe through that lens." She turned to fully face Jessica. "I wish to propose something. The Kumathi will establish a new cultural tradition, a festival, held each cycle, where we deliberately engage with vulnerability, where we play with imperfection rather than hiding from it. We will call it," she paused considering, "the Festival of Intentional Sneezes." Jessica blinked. "You're creating a holiday based on what happened today?" "Your species has holidays for stranger things, I suspect," Felinara said dryly. "But yes, we need reminders that dignity and joy can coexist, that our cubs can be children, not just small adults in training, that losing control occasionally is not the end of civilization." She gestured toward the plaza where more Kumathi had gathered, watching the cubs with expressions that ranged from bewilderment to cautious delight. For generations, we have taught our young to suppress, to control, to perfect themselves before they could truly live. But what is the point of perfection if it isolates us, if it prevents us from connecting with others, from experiencing joy in the moment rather than always striving for some unattainable ideal? Jessica watched as an elderly Kumati, fur gone silver with age, movements slow but deliberate, approached the group of cubs. The elder watched for a moment, then produced a small, tentative fake sneeze. The cubs erupted in excited chirps, immediately surrounding the elder with enthusiastic demonstrations of their own techniques. "That is Elder Whisper Wind," Bryn Nathor said quietly. "She has served on the High Council for 30 cycles. I have never seen her do anything undignified in public." "Until now," Jessica said softly. "Until now," Felinara agreed, "because a human laughed at my son's sneeze, and somehow that small moment became a catalyst for reconsidering everything we thought we knew about strength and dignity." In the plaza, Wisp sneezed, loud, proud, completely on purpose, and was rewarded with applause from both Kumati and humans alike. "He wants to sneeze on purpose forever," Bryn Nathor said fondly, watching his son. "I think we should let him." Jessica's communication device chirped. Commander Thane's message was brief. "What did you do?" "The Kumati just extended their stay by 3 weeks and requested expanded cultural exchange programs. Also, why is there a formal proposal in my inbox about sneeze festivals?" She grinned and sent back, "Fixed it." The response came quickly. "Cargo Bay 12 assignment cancelled. Well done, Lieutenant." Somehow. As the station's artificial evening cycle dimmed the lights to simulate nightfall, Jessica found herself back in the Arboretum with an unexpected visitor. Wisp had asked permission to see the plants again, and his parents had agreed, trusting the human who'd accidentally taught them that imperfection could be beautiful. The small cub examined the tomato plant with intense curiosity, then looked up at Jessica with those enormous eyes. "Will you teach me more about human things?" "Anytime you want, Wisp." He nodded seriously, then deliberately, playfully, sneezed. Fake and exaggerated, and filled with the kind of joy that transcends species. Jessica fake sneezed right back, and somewhere in the vast complexity of interstellar relations, diplomatic protocols, and cultural exchange, something simple and true had taken root. The understanding that vulnerability shared is connection earned, that laughter bridges gaps that rigid formality never could, and that sometimes the most profound diplomatic breakthroughs come from the smallest, silliest moments. Because humanity's real superpower was never technology or warfare or exploration. It was the ability to find joy in imperfection, to celebrate the messy reality of existence, and to invite others to laugh alongside us, even when, especially when, what we're laughing at is ourselves. The human had laughed when a cub sneezed. By evening, an entire species had learned to laugh with her. And the universe, in its infinite absurdity, was better for it.